You're really a useless wife.
My mother-in-law, Nancy, kept laughing through her nose, continuously muttering these cursed words as she relentlessly bullied me. However, there is a limit to how much a person can take. Of course, I had been patient up until then, but one day, it seemed like I finally reached my breaking point, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I'll be going back to my parents' house. When I said this to Nancy, she sneered and replied with the following words.
There are countless people out there who could replace you. Do whatever you want.
The next day, as I was preparing to leave the house, Nancy showed a completely different expression, almost as if she were a different person. I'm Michelle, a 39-year-old housewife who works part-time at a local supermarket. Before I got married 3 years ago, I worked in a busy office district in the city, but I quit my job when I got married. I actually wanted to continue working, but due to unavoidable circumstances, I ended up in this situation. My husband is a year younger than me and works as a regular office worker in a company in the city. We were both colleagues at the same company, and we hit it off at a company drinking party, which led to us dating, and now we're married. When we decided to get married, my father-in-law had already passed away, and my mother-in-law's father, who is disabled and requires care, was still alive. Apparently, Nancy had been the one taking care of him up until that point. So, my husband continued living at his parents' house because he knew it would be difficult for Nancy to manage the care on her own. As a result, when we got married, I couldn't leave the house, and it was decided that I would move in with my in-laws and help with caregiving. This is why I had to quit my job. Thus, I took on the role of supporting my in-laws in place of my husband. But from the very beginning, Nancy didn't think highly of me. She didn't approve of me being older than her son, and because I took her son, she had never been welcoming from the beginning. I knew there would be no sweet newlywed life, and I accepted that right away, but the reality was even worse than I imagined. From the very day we got married and started living together, Nancy's mistreatment of me as a daughter-in-law began. The moment I stepped into the house, Nancy stood there with her hands on her hips and ordered.
From today, you're in charge of all the housework and caregiving, but you'll do it my way.
She insisted that I follow her exact method for everything: how to hang laundry, how to fold it, how to clean, and even how to season the food.
You're older than my son, yet you can't even do housework properly.
If I did anything that didn't align with her way of doing things, even slightly, she would immediately yell at me.
Don't just make my son work. You should be earning money too.
And then she demanded that I work outside and bring in money, on top of doing all the housework and caregiving. Of course, she wouldn't allow me to slack off on either of those tasks. Wasn't it her decision for me to quit my job to take care of the house and caregiving? I thought this to myself, but I hated hearing complaints from Nancy any more than I had to. So I looked for a part-time job nearby and started working. However, I couldn't help but regret quitting my previous job, as these feelings of regret kept growing. But once I started working part-time, Nancy said to me,
With prices going up lately, you should put your salary into the household. You don't need extra money, do you?
so more than half of my earned salary was taken by Nancy. Originally, my husband's salary was more than enough to cover our living expenses, and since we worked at the same company, I knew his income. Nancy should also be receiving her pension, plus my father-in-law's survivor's pension, so she shouldn't be struggling for extra pocket money. That being said, it was too troublesome to press her further, so I decided not to pursue the matter anymore. But inside, I kept growing more and more frustrated, and it made me angry to stay silent. I thought about telling my husband, but recently, he had just been transferred to a new department at work, and he was coming home late at night. Moreover, he was leading a busy life, leaving the house early in the morning, and we hardly had any time to see each other. In such a situation, I felt guilty about making my husband worry about my problems, so I kept my unresolved feelings to myself, struggling quietly each day. The only thing that gave me a sense of relief was spending time with my grandfather-in-law. For some reason, he took a liking to me, and one day he invited me to draw a picture with him. After I joined him, we quickly became close. My in-laws' house was originally a large farm, with a beautiful garden full of various flowers and plants. This house belongs to Nancy's family, and my grandfather-in-law is Nancy's biological father. From the veranda of his room, I could see the entire garden, and I spent peaceful moments with him, enjoying the scenery. The wisteria trellis was especially beautiful, and I was told it was planted when my father-in-law and Nancy got married. My grandfather-in-law would tell me stories from the past while teaching me how to care for the flowers in the garden. One time, he asked me to teach him how to use a computer, so I showed him my fast typing skills, and I even played chess with him without knowing the rules, just mimicking what I had seen. My grandfather-in-law treated me like his real granddaughter, and I, in turn, grew fond of him as though he were my own grandfather. That made him really happy too. On my days off from my part-time job, I would sometimes spend the whole day engaging in his hobbies. But as we were enjoying our time together, Nancy would watch us with a contemptuous look. It seemed like she didn't like me getting along with my grandfather-in-law, and in fact, she appeared to absolutely despise it.
Go do the shopping. Do this for me.
Whenever I was with my grandfather-in-law, Nancy would intentionally find things for me to do, trying to interrupt the fun I was having with him. At times, she would call me into a place where grandfather couldn't see and make snide remarks.
Aren't you neglecting the housework since you're always playing around?
When that happened, my grandfather-in-law would call my name loudly and protect me from Nancy. I was truly grateful for his protection. But because of that, Nancy's attitude toward me became harsher and harsher. One day, since I had a day off from my part-time job, I went with the home helper to my grandfather-in-law's regular doctor's office to assist with trimming his nails. During that time, we chatted excitedly about the hobbies I had been enjoying with grandfather recently, and the helper, enviously, commented,
You seem to be having a lot of fun lately.
My grandfather-in-law smiled broadly and said,
It's really fun. I'm so happy my granddaughter-in-law is here.
She's such a kind and considerate granddaughter-in-law.
The helper said, and my grandfather-in-law, looking at me, replied,
Yes, she really is kind, and she's been smiling more lately.
Hearing such words directly made me feel a little embarrassed, but I also felt truly happy, like I had gained another grandfather.
With the rise of nuclear families, it's truly wonderful to see such a close-knit family.
The helper praised us, and grandfather and I exchanged smiles. Little did we know, Nancy had been secretly eavesdropping from the next room. After the helper left and my grandfather-in-law began his afternoon nap, I was about to leave the room when suddenly,
Michelle, can I talk to you for a second?
Nancy opened the sliding door to grandfather's room and showed her face. I thought she was going to give me some task, so I left my grandfather-in-law's room and faced her. She suddenly started complaining with a cold expression.
You know, just because you're young, don't think you can worm your way into his good graces. Don't get too cocky.
Honestly, I was taken aback, but I tried to explain. I don't mean that at all. I'm just interacting with him like a granddaughter. But Nancy wasn't even listening and threw out another nasty remark.
I just can't understand why his attitude towards me and you is so different.
Her words were so harsh that I couldn't help but snap back. Well, don't you think part of it is your fault? Nancy doesn't help with my grandfather-in-law's care at all, and I suspect she's been taking my paycheck and preventing me from going out for tea with friends. That's why I end up spending so much time at home and getting close to my grandfather-in-law. But what's so wrong with that? Nancy, on the other hand, is always going out, never talking to my grandfather-in-law, and certainly not helping with his care. Yet she has the nerve to complain. And when I speak up even a little, she just yells at me and rages.
Don't get too full of yourself. Who do you think you are? I shouldn't have ever let my son marry you.
I didn't marry him for you. I thought this to myself, but I had finally reached my breaking point. Nancy, don't you think you're going a bit too far? I snapped back, letting out everything I had been holding inside.
You lousy wife.
Nancy spat those words out and clenched her fists, her face turning bright red as she started trembling. She was so furious that steam seemed to be coming from her head, and she couldn't control her emotions, her lips twitching as she seethed with anger. Finally, Nancy said the one thing she shouldn't have.
I'd actually appreciate it if you just left. There are a million people out there who could replace you.
I was so frustrated that I asked her multiple times, "Are you sure you're okay with this?"
Of course. Get out of here now.
All right, if that's the case, I'll go back to my parents' house right now. I smiled quietly and said this, then packed my things and went back to my parents' house. The next day, Nancy showed up at my parents' house with her face swollen, looking like a completely different person. "Who are you?" I almost asked this out of surprise at her change, but Nancy didn't care about that at all. She came in without any shame.
I'm so sorry.
She said, and as soon as she saw me, her attitude completely shifted from yesterday, and she suddenly started apologizing to me. Tears in her eyes, Nancy explained that after I left for my parents' house, my grandfather-in-law woke up from his nap and noticed that I was missing, which made him worried. It seems that Nancy had tried to cover up by telling my grandfather-in-law that I had probably gone out shopping, but when I still hadn't returned by dinner time and was nowhere to be seen even after dinner, my grandfather-in-law, growing frustrated, reportedly interrogated Nancy, his own daughter. Being relentlessly questioned by my grandfather-in-law, Nancy must have gotten frustrated and tired of it. Feeling backed into a corner, Nancy seemed to have given up and thought, even if I tell the truth, it won't matter because the useless daughter-in-law isn't a big issue, and decided to tell her father, who was also my grandfather-in-law, what had happened.
I kicked her out because she's a useless daughter-in-law.
However, the moment Nancy told the truth, My grandfather-in-law reportedly yelled at her like a raging fire.
What the hell do you think you're doing? What have you done to my granddaughter-in-law? This is none of your business.
I had never seen my grandfather-in-law angry before, always knowing him to be kind, so imagining him in a rage was difficult. But apparently, he had always been a quiet and difficult person, and when he got mad, he was truly scary. Nancy never expected that my grandfather-in-law would care about me so much. Perhaps because he was her father, she might have taken him for granted in some way. Triggered by my grandfather-in-law's fury, Nancy was too scared to say anything in return.
Go apologize right now.
Feeling pressured, Nancy fell into a full panic, and thinking it was too dangerous to stay any longer, she hurriedly left the house without even finishing the post-meal cleanup. In her rush to escape, she must have been in such a fluster that she bumped into things around the house, fell, and by the time she returned to her room, her face was swelling up purple. Furthermore, Nancy was abruptly woken up by my husband, who came home late at night, and after learning the full truth, she was yelled at. From then on, whenever Nancy went out, my grandfather-in-law would secretly tell my husband, asking, "Where is she? Who is she with? What is she doing?" In this intense interrogation, Nancy, unable to handle the pain and fatigue, finally confessed that she had been taking my paycheck and spending it. It turned out that Nancy had used the money to go out during the day, treating friends and pretending to be a little celebrity.
What the hell have you done? If Michelle doesn't come back, you'll have to take responsibility.
My husband and grandfather-in-law reprimanded her even more intensely, further scolding her for her actions. This was how Nancy got herself into a mess and ended up coming to my parents' house to apologize on her own.
Please come back.
Nancy, apologizing and pleading, looked so pitiful that I was at a loss for words. However, considering everything that had happened, I couldn't easily forgive her. Still, for my grandfather-in-law's sake, I decided to set some conditions if I was going to continue living with them. From now on, I won't give you a single penny of my salary, and no more sarcastic comments. Housework and caregiving will be shared. Each time I listed a condition, Nancy would twitch her eyebrows and glare at me with a rebellious look. However, I firmly insisted that if she didn't agree to this, I would never return to the in-laws' house, and if she broke any of the promises, I would leave immediately. Feeling like she couldn't return without me, Nancy reluctantly agreed, though with an unhappy expression on her face. So, I pushed my conditions through, and we returned to the house. Afterward, my husband apologized as well, asking me,
I'm sorry I didn't realize. From now on, no matter how busy I am, please tell me if anything is bothering you.
I reflected on how I had been trying to handle everything on my own, and realized it wasn't a good idea.
You don't have to continue the part-time job if it's too much.
He said that too, but no matter how things started, I'm enjoying it now and plan to continue.
Taking the money from your daughter-in-law to go out and play is outrageous.
My grandfather-in-law also confronted Nancy about the salary she had taken, demanding that she return it all. Though Nancy seemed reluctant, my husband also told her,
My salary is enough for our living expenses, and your pension is probably enough for your pocket money.
Thus, Nancy was forced to pay back the money from her savings. After being thoroughly scolded by my grandfather-in-law and my husband, Nancy has become much quieter, and with constant supervision, She has gradually started helping with the housework. Since I couldn't be sure that just a verbal agreement would be enough, I decided to have Nancy write it down in front of both grandfather and my husband.
You really don't need to go that far.
I don't trust your word. If you won't write it down here, I'll throw you out of the house.
Nancy resisted, but when my grandfather-in-law pressed her, she reluctantly, and I mean really reluctantly, wrote it down in a barely legible handwriting, as if her hands were shaking. It almost looked like a grade schooler being scolded, as my grandfather-in-law had her rewrite it over and over until the letters were readable. With a look of resentment, Nancy handed me the paper, and when grandfather saw it, he glared at her, as if saying, "You still haven't learned your lesson." Realizing her father was genuinely angry, Nancy hung her head in silence, clearly embarrassed.
How about drawing a picture of flowers today? The wisteria is in full bloom and looks beautiful.
My grandfather-in-law returned to his usual gentle self, inviting me calmly. He quickly set up our paints and paper on the veranda, one set for me and one for him. I hope that these warm, peaceful moments continue for a long time, and I want to cherish them from now on.